Welcome to the channel Stories of Slavery. Today's story is from 1855, Iron Dillard. She was a black girl, the girl the fire could not burn. What happened to her had no explanation, no logic, no record that made sense. This is a heavy story. Take a breath. Listen carefully. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments the city and country you're listening from. Your presence keeps these stories alive, instead of forgotten. Let's begin. In the winter of 1855, something happened on the Whitmore plantation in Colleton County, South Carolina, that would be whispered about for generations. A fire consumed the main house and spread across the property in a pattern that investigators later described as impossible. The flames moved with what one witness called deliberate intention. They devoured the overseer's quarters. They reduced the cotton storehouse to ash. They turned the punishment shed into a memory. But somehow, inexplicably, they left the slave cabins completely untouched. 43 enslaved people vanished that night. The plantation owner survived, but he was found the next morning wandering the smoking ruins, his body covered in burn scars that formed letters. Initials. 37 sets of initials burned into his flesh. He never spoke again, not one coherent word for the rest of his life. When authorities asked the remaining witnesses what happened, they all said the same thing. They said the fire walked. They said it followed a girl. A 12-year-old girl who moved through the flames like she was walking through rain. This is the story of that girl. This is the story of Esther Dillard, the girl they called Iron, the girl that fire could not burn. To understand what happened that December night, we need to go back 12 years. We need to go back to the moment Esther came into the world. The Whitmore plantation sat on 2,300 acres of low country land, about 40 miles southwest of Charleston. In 1843, the year Esther was born, the plantation held 112 enslaved people and produced roughly 400 bales of cotton annually. The owner, Randolph Whitmore, was 41 years old and considered himself a progressive master. He allowed his slaves 1 day of rest per week. He permitted them to maintain small garden plots behind their cabins. He even hired a doctor to visit the property twice a year to examine the workforce. In Randolph Whitmore's mind, these small mercies made him a good man. The people he owned knew differently. Esther's mother was a woman named Lily. She was 23 years old when she gave birth, and she worked in the main house as a domestic servant. Lily was known for her quiet nature and her careful movements. She had learned early that survival meant invisibility. The less the white folks noticed you, the safer you were. She kept her eyes down. She answered questions with as few words as possible. She made herself small and useful and forgettable. For 6 years, this strategy kept her alive. The night Esther was born, a storm rolled across the low country. Witnesses remembered lightning striking the old oak tree near the slave quarters 3 times in succession. Mama Zora, the oldest woman on the plantation, was 78 years old that year, and she had delivered more babies than she could count. She was the one who caught Esther when she came into the world, and she was the first one to notice that something was different about this child. The baby did not cry. Most newborns announce their arrival with screaming. Esther simply opened her eyes and looked around the room as if she was taking inventory. Mama Zora would later say that the child's eyes held an old soul, a soul that had seen things, a soul that remembered. But what truly disturbed Mama Zora happened moments after the birth. A candle on the windowsill had been knocked over during the delivery. The flame caught the edge of the blanket that Lily had been lying on. In the chaos of the moment, no one noticed until the fire was already spreading. Mama Zora grabbed the newborn to pull her away from danger. But Esther had already rolled toward the flames. Her tiny hand reached out and touched the fire directly. Mama Zora screamed. She was certain she would find the baby's hand destroyed. Instead, she found the child perfectly unharmed. The fire had gone out the moment Esther touched it. The baby's skin showed no burns, no redness, nothing. Mama Zora was from the Gullah people. Her grandmother had been brought to America from the region that is now Sierra Leone. She had been raised on stories of spirits and ancestors, of children born with gifts from the other side. She looked at baby Esther, and she recognized something. She told no one what she had seen. Some things she understood were too dangerous to speak aloud. For the first 5 years of Esther's life, nothing unusual happened. Or rather, nothing that anyone noticed. Lily raised her daughter in the small cabin she shared with 2 other women and their children. Esther was a quiet child, much like her mother. She watched more than she spoke. She listened more than she asked. The other children on the plantation found her strange. She would sit for hours staring at cooking fires, at candles, at the lanterns that hung outside the overseer's office. Fire seemed to fascinate her in a way that made adults uncomfortable. When Esther was 5 years old, the event happened that would change everything. It was August of 1848. The summer had been brutal, with temperatures reaching over 100 degrees for weeks at a time. The slave cabins were poorly ventilated, built with gaps in the walls that let in winter cold but did nothing to relieve summer heat. On the night of August 17th, a cooking fire that had not been properly extinguished flared up inside one of the cabins. The flames spread quickly through the dry wooden structure. 7 people were sleeping inside, including Esther and her mother. Lily woke to the smell of smoke. The cabin was already filled with it, thick and black and choking. She could hear screaming from the other families. She grabbed for Esther, but her daughter was not beside her. In the confusion and darkness, Lily could not find her child. She was forced to flee the burning structure, certain that her daughter was dead. The cabin burned for nearly an hour. When the flames finally died down, the enslaved community gathered around the smoking ruins to mourn. 6 people had escaped. 1 person was missing. Little Esther, 5 years old, was assumed to be dead. Then something impossible happened. The ashes shifted. A small figure sat up in the middle of the destruction. Esther stood, completely naked because her clothes had burned away, but her body was untouched. She was covered in soot, but showed no burns, no blisters, no injuries of any kind. She walked out of the ashes toward her mother, who collapsed to her knees in shock. The witnesses did not know what to make of what they had seen. Some believed it was a miracle from God. Others believed it was the work of the devil. Mama Zora said nothing, but she watched the child with new intensity. The news reached Randolph Whitmore by morning. The plantation owner came to see the girl for himself. He examined her skin, looking for evidence of burns or tricks. He found nothing. The child stood before him, small and silent, meeting his gaze in a way that enslaved children were taught never to do. Whitmore was a practical man. He did not believe in miracles or devils. He believed in science and logic and the natural order of things. What he had heard was impossible, which meant there had to be an explanation. The child must have escaped the fire before it spread. The witnesses must have been confused. The story must have grown in the telling. But something about the girl unsettled him, the way she looked at him, the steadiness in her eyes. He made a decision in that moment that would define the next 7 years of Esther's life. He decided to test her. The first test happened that same day. Whitmore ordered a small fire to be built in the yard outside the slave quarters. He told his overseer, a man named Thomas Garrett, to bring the girl forward. Lily screamed and begged, but she was held back. Whitmore told the child to put her hand in the fire. Esther looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked forward and placed both hands directly into the flames. She did not scream. She did not flinch. She held her hands in the fire for nearly a minute while everyone watched in stunned silence. When she withdrew them, her palms were not even warm to the touch. Whitmore's practical mind struggled to process what he had witnessed. He would spend the next 7 years trying to understand it. He would fail. From that day forward, Randolph Whitmore became obsessed with the girl. He gave her a new name. He called her Iron. It was meant as mockery, a reference to the folk belief that iron could ward off evil spirits. If the devil protected this child, Whitmore reasoned, then perhaps iron could break whatever spell she was under. The name stuck. The enslaved community adopted it, though for different reasons. To them, iron was not an insult. It was a testament to strength. It was a reminder that something powerful lived among them, something that even the master could not destroy. The tests continued. Whitmore subjected Iron to increasingly cruel experiments over the following years. He had her hold hot coals. He had her touch branding irons fresh from the forge. He once ordered her locked in the smokehouse for 3 days, surrounded by controlled fires. Each time, Iron emerged unharmed. Each time, Whitmore's frustration grew. What disturbed him most was not the girl's apparent immunity to fire. It was her demeanor. She never cried. She never begged. She simply endured, watching him with those steady eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Sometimes, after a particularly brutal test, Whitmore would wake in the middle of the night convinced that the girl was standing at the foot of his bed. She never was. But the feeling persisted. The enslaved community developed their own theories about Iron. Some believed she was protected by African spirits. Others thought she was a sign from God that deliverance was coming. A few, mostly those who had converted to Christianity and abandoned the old beliefs, thought she was dangerous and should be avoided. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. There was something about this child that defied explanation. Mama Zora kept her own counsel, but on Iron's 7th birthday, she called the girl to her cabin and began to teach her. Mama Zora was the keeper of memory on the Whitmore plantation. She remembered the old stories, the ones that had been passed down from generation to generation, stretching back to Africa. Most of the younger people had forgotten these stories or dismissed them as superstition. But Mama Zora understood that stories were more than entertainment. They were survival. They were identity. They were a bridge to a past that slavery tried to erase. She told Iron about Ogum. In the Yoruba tradition, Ogum was the spirit of iron and fire, the divine blacksmith who cleared paths through the wilderness. He was a warrior spirit, fierce and uncompromising, associated with justice and the protection of the oppressed. Mama Zora explained that sometimes, in times of great suffering, Ogum would send his blessing to certain children. These children would be marked by fire. They would be immune to its destruction because they carried its power inside them. Iron listened to these stories without comment. She did not know if she believed them, but she recognized something in them that felt true. She had always known she was different. Now she was beginning to understand why. Mama Zora also taught her something practical. She taught her how to control it. The old woman had observed Iron carefully over the years. She had noticed that the girl's power was not simply passive immunity. It was active, even if Iron did not realize it. Small fires would extinguish themselves when Iron became calm. They would flare up when she became angry or frightened. The gift was connected to her emotions, to her will. Mama Zora believed it could be developed. The training happened in secret, late at night when the plantation was asleep. Mama Zora would light a small candle and have Iron practice controlling the flame with her mind. At first, nothing happened. But over weeks and months, Iron began to feel something. A connection. A thread between herself and the fire, as real as a rope in her hands. She learned to make the flame grow larger. She learned to make it shrink. She learned to move it, to shape it, to bend it to her will. She told no one what she was learning, not even her mother. Some things, Mama Zora warned, were too dangerous to share. If the master ever discovered that Iron could not only survive fire but command it, There was no telling what he might do. The years passed. Iron grew from a child into a young girl, and the plantation continued its brutal rhythm. Cotton was planted in the spring, cultivated through the summer, harvested in the fall. The enslaved people worked from sunrise to sunset, their lives measured in pounds of cotton picked and bales produced. The system was designed to extract maximum labor while spending minimum resources on the people who provided that labor. It was efficient. It was profitable. It was evil. Iron worked in the field starting at age 8. By 10, she was expected to pick 50 pounds of cotton per day. By 12, that quota had risen to 100 pounds. The work was backbreaking, the conditions dangerous. Cotton plants had sharp edges that cut hands and arms. The South Carolina sun was merciless. Dehydration, heat stroke, and exhaustion claimed lives every summer. But through it all, Iron endured. She developed a reputation as a steady worker, not the fastest, but never failing to meet her quota. She kept to herself, speaking little, watching everything. The other enslaved people respected her but also feared her slightly. They had not forgotten what she was, what she could do. Thomas Garrett, the overseer, particularly disliked Iron. He was a violent man who took pleasure in punishment, and Iron's immunity to certain forms of discipline infuriated him. He could not burn her. When he tried to whip her, the wounds would heal overnight, leaving no scars. It was as if her body rejected any permanent marking. Garrett interpreted this as defiance. He looked for other ways to hurt her. When Iron was 11, Garrett discovered her weakness. He could not harm Iron directly, but he could harm the people she loved. One evening, Garrett caught Iron speaking with a boy named Samuel. They were just talking, sharing a few minutes of rest after the day's work. But Garrett claimed they were planning something. He dragged Samuel to the punishment post and whipped him bloody while Iron was forced to watch. The message was clear. She might be untouchable, but the people around her were not. From that day forward, Iron understood that her gift was also a burden. Her immunity protected only her. Everyone she cared about remained vulnerable. This knowledge would shape every decision she made in the years to come. By 1855, the world outside the Whitmore plantation was changing. The tension between North and South over the question of slavery had reached a breaking point. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had made it a federal crime to assist runaway slaves, even in states where slavery was illegal. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 had opened new territories to slavery, sparking violent conflicts between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers. The country was moving toward war, though few could see it clearly yet. Inside the plantation, these distant events seemed almost unreal. The enslaved people heard rumors and fragments of news, but their daily reality remained unchanged. They planted and picked and survived, generation after generation, waiting for a freedom that might never come. Lily, Iron's mother, was 35 years old in 1855. The years of labor had aged her beyond her years. Her hands were permanently calloused, her back bent from decades of bending over cotton plants. But she had survived, and she had kept her daughter alive. In the brutal calculus of slavery, this counted as success. In the spring of that year, something happened that would set the final events in motion. The plantation's head cook, a woman named Bessie, was caught hiding food. She had been taking small amounts from the kitchen to feed her grandson, a sickly boy who was not getting enough nutrition. It was a minor theft by any reasonable standard, but Randolph Whitmore did not tolerate theft of any kind. He decided to make an example of her. Bessie was given 50 lashes. She was 62 years old. She did not survive. The enslaved community mourned in silence. They had no power to protest, no recourse to justice. But the anger and grief rippled through the quarters, adding to years of accumulated pain. Iron felt it intensely. Bessie had been kind to her as a child. She had slipped her extra food when no one was looking. She had told her stories about her grandmother in Africa. Now she was dead, killed for the crime of feeding a hungry child. That night, Iron could not sleep. She lay in her cabin, staring at the ceiling, and felt something shifting inside her. The fire that lived within her, that she had learned to control and contain, was pushing against its boundaries. It wanted out. It wanted to burn. Mama Zora came to her. The old woman was 89 now, frail and nearly blind. But she still knew things. She could still sense when the spirits were moving. She told Iron that the time was coming. She did not know exactly when or how, but she could feel it. A reckoning was approaching. Iron would have to choose what kind of person she wanted to be. She could use her gift for destruction, burning everything and everyone who had hurt her. Or she could use it for something greater. She could use it to save her people. Iron did not respond. She was not ready to make that choice. Not yet. 2 weeks later, her mother was accused of theft. The accusation came from Cornelius, the plantation's black overseer. Cornelius was a complicated figure in the hierarchy of the Whitmore plantation. He was an enslaved man who had been given authority over other enslaved people. He carried a whip. He reported infractions to the master. He enforced discipline. In exchange, he received better food, better housing, and a measure of protection from the worst abuses. Many of the other enslaved people despised him. They saw him as a traitor, a man who had sold his soul for scraps from the master's table. Cornelius claimed he had seen Lily stealing flour from the kitchen storehouse. The evidence was flimsy. No flour was found in Lily's possession. But Randolph Whitmore trusted his black overseer. It was convenient to have a black man enforce discipline on black bodies. It created division among the enslaved population. It made them distrust each other. It was a strategy as old as slavery itself. Whitmore decided that Lily would be sold. Not whipped, not punished on the plantation, but sold to a trader who would take her to the Mississippi cotton fields. This was in many ways a fate worse than death. The Mississippi plantations were notorious for their brutality. Life expectancy for enslaved people there was measured in single-digit years, and Lily would be separated from her daughter forever. The sale was scheduled for June 10th, 1855. Iron learned of the decision the night before. She found her mother in their cabin, packing the few possessions she was allowed to take. Lily was not crying. She had moved beyond tears into a kind of numb acceptance. This was the reality of their lives. Families were separated. Mothers were torn from children. Love was a liability because it gave the masters one more weapon to use against you. Iron did not accept it. For the first time in her life, she felt the full power of her gift rising within her. It was not a gentle warmth but a roaring furnace, demanding release. She could burn the entire plantation to the ground. She could kill Whitmore and Garrett and everyone who had made their lives a living hell. She could have her revenge. But Mama Zora's words echoed in her mind. Destruction was easy, building something better was hard. If she simply burned everything, what would happen to the 100 other enslaved people on this plantation? What would happen to the children? What would happen to the old and the sick who could not run? Her revenge would consume them along with her enemies. She made a decision. She would not simply destroy. She would liberate. That night, Iron began to plan. She went first to Solomon, the plantation blacksmith. Solomon was 53 years old and had lived on the Whitmore plantation for 30 years. He was skilled at his trade, valuable enough that Whitmore had never considered selling him. But Solomon carried deep wounds. 15 years earlier, his wife and 2 sons had been sold to pay off Whitmore's gambling debts. He had never recovered from that loss. He did his work mechanically, spoke to no one, and waited for death. Iron found him in the forge, working late on a set of horseshoes. She told him what she was planning. She told him about her gift. She showed him creating a flame in her palm and letting it dance between her fingers. Solomon watched without expression. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he asked her one question. Could she really get people out? Not just herself, but everyone who wanted to go. Iron told him the truth. She did not know. But she was going to try. Solomon nodded slowly. For the first time in 15 years, something flickered in his eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. He would help her. He would forge what they needed. Keys, tools, weapons if necessary. But he warned her about something. He warned her about Cornelius. The black overseer was dangerous, Solomon said. Not because he was strong or smart, but because he was desperate. He had built his entire identity around his position. If the slaves escaped, if the plantation fell, Cornelius would lose everything. He would fight to preserve the system that gave him power, even though that system enslaved him too. Iron thanked Solomon for the warning. But she had already known about Cornelius. She had known for years. What she did not know yet was the truth about his connection to her. The planning took time. Iron could not simply announce her intentions. She had to identify who would be willing to run and who might betray them. She had to map escape routes, she had to coordinate timing, and she had to keep her mother from being sold while she put everything in place. The last part proved impossible. On June 10th, as scheduled, a slave trader arrived at the Whitmore plantation. His name was Marcus Webb, and he operated throughout the Deep South, buying and selling human beings like livestock. He had come for Lily and 3 other enslaved people who Whitmore had decided to sell. Iron watched from the fields as her mother was led to the wagon. Lily looked back once, found her daughter in the crowd, and held her gaze. No words were spoken. None were needed. In that look was everything. Love, grief, a desperate prayer that her daughter would survive. Then, Lily was loaded into the wagon, and the wagon pulled away, and Iron's mother disappeared down the road toward Mississippi. Iron stood frozen. The fire inside her surged and screamed. She could feel it trying to escape, trying to reach out and stop the wagon, trying to burn everything in its path. It took every ounce of control she had to hold it back. She could not act now. Not in daylight, surrounded by overseers with guns. She would die, and she would save no one. That night something changed in Iron. The girl who had endured 7 years of tests, who had watched and waited and learned to control herself, was gone. In her place was something harder, something colder, something that had made a decision. She would not just escape. She would not just liberate her people. She would make Randolph Whitmore pay for every life he had destroyed. She would make him understand exactly what he had done, and she would do it in a way he would never forget. The next morning, Iron went to Mama Zora one final time. The old woman was dying. She had held on for years, sustained by sheer will and the knowledge that she had one more task to complete. Now, with Iron standing before her, she could feel that task coming to its end. She told Iron the last piece of the story, the part she had held back for 12 years. On the night Iron was born, during that terrible storm, Mama Zora had seen something. When the lightning struck the oak tree 3 times, she had seen a figure standing beneath it. A figure made of flame, shaped like a man but burning with impossible intensity. The figure had looked toward the cabin where Lily was giving birth. Then it had nodded once, as if confirming something. And then it had disappeared. Mama Zora believed she had seen Ogum himself. The spirit of iron and fire, the warrior who clears paths, had come to witness the birth of one of his children. He had marked Iron for a purpose. Not just survival, not just personal power, but liberation. Iron listened to the old woman's words. She did not know if she believed in Ogum. She did not know if she believed in anything beyond the reality of her own experience. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was going to free her people. She was going to burn down the system that enslaved them. And she was going to find her mother, no matter how long it took. Mama Zora smiled. She reached out and touched Iron's face with her withered hand. She told Iron that she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. She had been brought to this plantation 60 years ago, stolen from her family in Africa, and she had survived everything they threw at her. She had survived because she knew, deep in her bones, that someone was coming. Someone who would set things right, now that someone was here. Mama Zora could finally rest. She died that night, peacefully, with a smile on her face. The enslaved community buried her beneath the oak tree, where Ogum had appeared. Iron stood at the grave as the sun rose, and she made a silent promise. She would honor Mama Zora's faith. She would honor her ancestors. She would become the warrior they had prayed for. The fire inside her burned steady and strong, waiting to be unleashed. December was 6 months away. Iron had work to do. The months between June and December of 1855 were the most intense of Iron's young life. She was 12 years old, a child by any normal measure. But there was nothing normal about her circumstances or her responsibilities. She was planning the largest escape in the history of Colleton County. She was preparing to challenge a system that had endured for 200 years, and she was doing it all while maintaining the appearance of an obedient slave. The first priority was recruitment. Iron needed to identify who would run and who could be trusted. This was dangerous work. One wrong choice, one person who decided to betray the group for favor with the master, and everyone would die. She started with the people she knew best. The women who had shared cabins with her mother. The children she had grown up with. The older workers who had shown her small kindnesses over the years. She approached each one carefully, testing their reactions before revealing anything specific. The responses varied. Some people were eager, desperate for any chance at freedom. Others were terrified, convinced that escape was impossible and that trying would only make things worse. A few refused to even discuss the possibility, too broken by years of abuse to imagine anything different. Iron did not pressure anyone. She made her case simply and honestly. She told them about her gift. She demonstrated it when necessary. She explained her plan in broad strokes. Then she let them decide. By September, she had 43 confirmed participants, men, women, and children ranging in age from 6 to 72. It was more than she had hoped for. It was also more than she had planned for. Moving that many people without detection would be extraordinarily difficult. The second priority was the route. Iron studied the geography of the area obsessively. She learned which roads were patrolled and when. She identified rivers and swamps that could provide cover. She located the stations of the Underground Railroad, the secret network of safe houses that helped escaped slaves reach the north. The closest reliable station was in Georgetown, about 50 miles northeast of the plantation. A free black family named the Washingtons operated out of their home there, sheltering runaways and connecting them with guides who could take them further north. If Iron could get her group to Georgetown, they would have a chance. But 50 miles was a long way to travel on foot, especially with children and elderly people. They would need supplies, rest stops, contingency plans. Iron worked through the details methodically, trying to anticipate every problem. The third priority was dealing with Cornelius. The black overseer had become more aggressive since Lily's sale. He seemed to sense that something was changing among the enslaved population. He watched Iron with particular intensity, looking for evidence of whatever he suspected. Iron avoided him as much as possible, but on a plantation, complete avoidance was impossible. In October, Cornelius confronted her. He found her alone, near the edge of the cotton fields, during the brief break between afternoon work and evening meal. He told her that he knew she was planning something. He did not know what, but he could feel it. The air on the plantation felt different, People were whispering. He was going to find out what was happening, and when he did, there would be consequences. Iron looked at him steadily. She asked him why he cared. He was enslaved just like them. Whitmore could sell him tomorrow if he wanted. All his power, all his privilege could be taken away in an instant. Why did he fight so hard to protect a system that saw him as property? Cornelius's face twisted with something between anger and pain. He told her she did not understand. He told her that survival was all that mattered. The strong survived by any means necessary. The weak were crushed. That was the way of the world, and no amount of wishful thinking would change it. Iron said nothing. She simply looked at him with those steady eyes that had unnerved Randolph Whitmore for 7 years. After a long moment, Cornelius turned and walked away. But their conversation was not finished. A week later, Iron learned the truth about Cornelius, and it changed everything. Solomon the blacksmith was the one who told her. He had debated whether to share this information. It was not his secret to tell, but he had decided that Iron deserved to know the truth before she made her final plans. Cornelius was her father. 13 years ago, before Cornelius had become an overseer, he and Lily had been involved. It was not a romance. Romance was almost impossible under slavery, but they had found comfort in each other, two young people trying to survive an inhuman system. When Lily became pregnant, Cornelius made a choice. He distanced himself from her. He threw himself into earning the master's trust. He climbed the brutal hierarchy of the plantation until he reached the position of overseer. He did it, Solomon said, because he was terrified. He thought that by gaining power he could protect himself. Maybe he even thought he could protect his child from a distance. But the price of that power was his soul. He became the thing he had feared. He became an enforcer of the very system that enslaved him. Iron absorbed this information in silence. She thought about all the times Cornelius had watched her with that strange intensity. She had assumed it was suspicion or hostility. Now she understood it was something more complicated. Guilt, shame, a desperate, twisted kind of love that had been poisoned by fear. It did not change her plans. Cornelius had made his choices. He had helped sell her mother. He had whipped and brutalized her people for years. Whatever might have been possible between them, whatever relationship they might have had, was buried under mountains of suffering. She would not forgive him. She would not save him, but she would not kill him either, not unless he gave her no choice. November arrived, and with it, the harvest. The cotton had to be picked, processed, and baled for market. The work was exhausting, 16-hour days that left the enslaved workers barely able to stand. Iron pushed through it, conserving her strength for what was coming. She had chosen the date, December 17th, 1855. It was a Saturday, which meant the enslaved population would have Sunday to rest, giving them additional hours before their absence was noticed. It was also the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. More darkness meant more time to travel. In the final weeks, Iron refined her plan. The escape would begin at midnight. She would create a distraction, using her gift to start fires in strategic locations around the plantation. While the overseers and Whitmore dealt with the chaos, the escapees would gather at a predetermined point near the northern edge of the property. From there, they would move quickly toward Georgetown. Iron would cover their retreat. She would stay behind, managing the fires, ensuring that no one could follow. When the group was safely away, she would catch up to them. Her immunity to fire meant she could move through burning areas that would stop any pursuer. But before she left, she had one final task to complete. Randolph Whitmore was going to learn what it felt like to be marked, to be branded, to carry permanent reminders of his sins on his flesh. Iron had been planning this part carefully. She had memorized the names of every person Whitmore had sold, every family he had separated. Every life he had destroyed. 37 people, 37 sets of initials. They would be burned into his skin forever. It was not murder. Whitmore would survive, at least physically. But he would never forget what he had done, and everyone who saw him would know that he had been judged. The night of December 16th, Iron visited the grave beneath the oak tree one final time. She knelt in the cold grass and spoke to Mama Zora. She told her that tomorrow was the day. She asked for her blessing and her guidance. She promised that she would not fail. The wind picked up, rustling the bare branches of the oak. For just a moment, Iron thought she felt a hand on her shoulder. When she turned, there was no one there, but she felt comforted nonetheless. She returned to her cabin and lay down to rest. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow she would either win her freedom or die trying. Tomorrow, the Whitmore plantation would burn. December 17th, 1855 began like any other winter day on the Whitmore plantation. The temperature hovered just above freezing when the morning bell rang at 5:30. The enslaved workers emerged from their cabins into the grey dawn, breath visible in the cold air, and made their way to their assigned tasks. Winter meant reduced fieldwork, but increased labor in other areas. There was equipment to repair, buildings to maintain, livestock to tend. The plantation never truly rested. Iron moved through her morning routines with careful precision. She could not afford to do anything that might attract attention. Not today. She worked in the kitchen garden, pulling the last of the winter vegetables, her hands steady despite the anticipation coursing through her body. Every few minutes, she glanced at the sky, tracking the position of the sun, counting down the hours until darkness. The other conspirators were doing the same. Iron had given each of them specific instructions. Act normal, do nothing unusual, stay calm. When the fires started, move quickly to the gathering point near the old mill at the northern edge of the property. Do not wait for anyone who is not there. Do not look back. The hardest part was the children. There were 9 children among the 43 escapees, ranging in age from 6 to 14. Iron had debated whether to include them at all. Children were unpredictable. They might cry at the wrong moment, slow down the group, give away their position. But she could not leave them behind. She could not ask parents to abandon their children, and she could not condemn another generation to grow up in chains. The youngest was a boy named Isaiah. He was 6 years old, small for his age, with large, serious eyes that reminded Iron of herself at that age. Isaiah's mother, a woman named Ruth, had been one of the first to commit to the escape. She had told Iron that she would rather die free than live another day as a slave. She had told Iron that she wanted her son to know what freedom felt like, even if it was only for a few hours before they were caught. Iron had promised Ruth that they would not be caught. She intended to keep that promise. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Iron performed her tasks mechanically, her mind running through the plan again and again, looking for weaknesses she might have missed. She had prepared for many contingencies: weather, injuries, unexpected patrols. But she knew that something would go wrong. Something always went wrong. The question was whether she could adapt quickly enough to survive it. At 4 in the afternoon, the winter sun began to set. By 5:30, full darkness had fallen. The enslaved workers returned to their cabins for the evening meal, a meager portion of cornmeal and salt pork that was never enough to satisfy hunger, but was all they would receive until morning. Iron ate slowly, forcing herself to consume every bite. She would need her strength tonight. When she finished, she sat in the corner of her cabin and waited. The other occupants, 2 older women who were not part of the escape, settled onto their pallets and fell asleep. Iron remained motionless, listening to the sounds of the plantation settling into night. At 11:30, she rose silently and slipped out of the cabin. The night was cold and clear, with a half-moon providing just enough light to navigate by. Iron moved through the slave quarters like a shadow, pausing at predetermined cabins to signal those who were waiting. One by one, small groups began making their way toward the gathering point. They moved in silence, staying low, avoiding the main paths where they might be spotted. Iron did not join them immediately. She had other business first. She made her way to the main house, staying in the shadows, watching for movement. The overseer's cabin showed a dim light through the window, probably Thomas Garrett drinking himself to sleep as he did most nights. The main house was dark, except for a single lamp in Randolph Whitmore's study. The plantation owner often worked late, reviewing accounts and correspondence. Iron circled the house until she found the position she had scouted weeks earlier, a window on the ground floor that led to a storage room. The window had a broken latch that no one had bothered to repair. She eased it open and climbed inside. The storage room was filled with household supplies, linens and cleaning materials, and spare furniture. Iron moved through it carefully, making no sound, until she reached the door that led to the main hallway. She pressed her ear against the wood and listened. Silence. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The house was quiet. The servants all retired to their own quarters for the night. Iron knew the layout well. She had worked in this house during the years when Whitmore was conducting his tests. She knew which floorboards creaked, which doors stuck, which rooms were occupied at what hours. She made her way to the study. The door was slightly ajar, lamplight spilling through the gap. Iron could hear the scratch of a pen on paper. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Randolph Whitmore looked up from his desk. For a moment he did not seem to recognize her. Then understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Iron closed the door behind her. Whitmore rose from his chair, his hand moving toward the desk drawer where Iron knew he kept a pistol. Before he could reach it, Iron raised her hand. A ball of flame appeared in her palm, bright enough to illuminate the entire room. Whitmore froze. Iron told him to sit down. She told him that if he called for help, she would burn this house to the ground with him inside it. She told him that she had come to deliver a message. A final message. Whitmore sat. His face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. He asked her what she wanted. His voice cracked on the last word. Iron told him that she wanted him to understand what he had done. She wanted him to carry the memory of it forever. She wanted him to look in the mirror every day for the rest of his life and see the evidence of his sins staring back at him. She pulled a branding iron from beneath her clothing. Solomon had forged it for her. It was small, designed to make letters rather than the large symbols typically used on livestock, on enslaved people. Whitmore's eyes widened. He started to rise again, but iron increased the intensity of the flame in her hand. The heat pushed him back into his chair. She told him the names, all 37 of them. She started with James and Mary Washington, sold in 1841 to pay off a business debt. She continued with Solomon's wife and 2 sons, sold in 1840 to cover gambling losses. She named the children who had been torn from their mothers, the husbands separated from wives, the elderly people sold when they became too old to work efficiently. She named them all, one by one, while Randolph Whitmore listened in horrified silence. When she finished, she told him that these names would now be written on his body. He would carry them until the day he died. And when people asked what the marks meant, he would have to explain. He would have to confess. Whitmore began to beg. He offered her money, freedom papers, anything she wanted. He swore he would change, that he would free all his slaves, that he would become a different man. The words poured out of him in a desperate flood. Iron listened without expression. When he finally fell silent, she asked him one question. She asked him if he had shown mercy when her mother begged not to be sold, when families pleaded not to be separated, when children cried out for parents they would never see again. Whitmore had no answer. Iron heated the branding iron with a touch of her hand. The metal glowed red, then orange, then white. She approached the plantation owner slowly, giving him time to understand what was coming. The first letter was L for Lily. Iron pressed the brand to Whitmore's chest while he screamed. The process took nearly an hour. 37 sets of initials burned into the skin of the man who had destroyed 37 lives. Whitmore lost consciousness several times, but Iron waited each time for him to revive before continuing. She wanted him to feel it. She wanted him to remember. When she finished, Whitmore was barely conscious, his body covered in burns that would scar permanently. Iron looked at him without pity. She told him that he would live. She told him that living with what he had done would be his punishment. Death would have been too easy. Then she turned and walked out of the study, leaving Randolph Whitmore whimpering in his chair. Outside, the night air felt clean and sharp after the smell of burned flesh. Iron took a deep breath and focused on the next phase of the plan. She had spent too long in the house. She needed to create the distraction now, before someone discovered Whitmore and raised the alarm. She started with the overseer's cabin. Thomas Garrett was asleep when the fire began. The flames spread quickly through the dry wooden structure, engulfing it within minutes. Garrett barely made it out alive, stumbling into the yard in his nightclothes, screaming for help. His screams woke the other white employees of the plantation. They emerged from their quarters to find multiple fires breaking out across the property. The cotton storehouse was burning. The equipment shed was burning. The punishment post, where so many enslaved people had suffered, was already reduced to ashes. The fires moved with unnatural precision. They consumed the buildings associated with the operation of the plantation while avoiding the slave cabins entirely. To the panicked witnesses, it looked like the hand of God reaching down to deliver judgment on the wicked while sparing the innocent. Iron stood at the center of the chaos, invisible in the smoke and confusion, directing the flames with her mind. She felt the fire as an extension of her own body, each blaze responding to her will, like a limb responding to thought. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. She had never used her gift at this scale before. She could feel the power wanting to grow, to consume everything in its path. It took constant concentration to maintain control. While the white employees fought uselessly against the spreading fires, the 43 escapees gathered at the old mill. Iron had designated Solomon to lead them in her absence. The blacksmith counted heads, confirmed that everyone was present, and led the group into the darkness toward the north. Iron remained behind, managing the distraction, ensuring that no one tried to follow. She watched the main house, waiting for someone to discover Whitmore and sound a different kind of alarm. It happened sooner than she expected. A house servant named Clara had heard the commotion and gone to check on the master. Her screams when she found him cut through the noise of the fires. Within minutes, the focus shifted from fighting the flames to attending to Whitmore. In the chaos, no one noticed that more than 40 enslaved people were missing. Iron allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. The plan was working. Then she turned and ran north, following the trail the escapees had taken. She caught up with them after about 2 miles. Solomon had kept them moving at a steady pace, not too fast for the children and elderly, but quick enough to put distance between them and the plantation. Iron fell in at the rear of the group, watching for pursuit. For the first hour there was none. The fires had done their job, creating confusion and consuming the attention of everyone who might have organized a search party. But Iron knew it would not last. By morning, Whitmore's injuries would be discovered. The missing slaves would be noticed. Patrols would be sent out. The hunt would begin. They needed to reach Georgetown before that happened. The route Iron had planned took them through a series of swamps and forests, avoiding roads and settlements. It was difficult terrain, especially in darkness, but it provided cover. The swamps in particular would make it hard for dogs to track their scent. Iron had studied the techniques of the Underground Railroad carefully, learning everything she could about how successful escapes were conducted. The group moved in near silence. Even the children seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. They clung to their parents, muffling any sounds of fear or discomfort. Iron watched young Isaiah walking beside his mother Ruth, his small hand gripping hers tightly. The boy's face was determined, focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Around 3 in the morning, they stopped to rest near a creek. The elderly and the very young needed to recover their strength. Iron posted lookouts and distributed the small amount of food they had managed to bring. It was not much, dried corn and a few strips of preserved meat, but it was enough to provide energy for the next stage of the journey. During the rest stop, Iron noticed something troubling. One of the escapees, a man named Thomas, was missing. She asked Solomon when Thomas had last been seen. Solomon did not know. In the darkness and confusion of the escape, it was impossible to keep track of every individual. Thomas might have fallen behind miles ago. He might have gotten lost. Or he might have decided to return to the plantation. Iron considered the implications. If Thomas had returned, either by choice or because he was captured, the search parties would know which direction the group had gone. They would know how many people were involved. The element of surprise would be lost. She made a quick decision. The group would change direction, heading east toward the coast before turning north again. It would add miles to their journey, but it might throw off pursuit. They resumed walking at 4 in the morning, just as the first grey light began to appear on the horizon. Iron pushed them hard, knowing that every minute of daylight increased their danger. By noon, they had covered another 10 miles, but the pace was taking its toll. Several of the older escapees were struggling. 2 of the children had to be carried. They found shelter in an abandoned barn near the edge of a cotton plantation. Iron scouted the area, confirming that the barn was not in use and that they were unlikely to be discovered. The group collapsed onto the hay-covered floor, exhausted beyond words. Iron did not rest. She climbed to the barn's loft and watched the surrounding countryside through gaps in the wooden walls. In the distance, she could see riders on the road moving fast. Patrol parties, almost certainly, looking for them. The hours passed with agonizing tension. Several times riders came close enough that Iron could hear their voices, but they did not search the barn. Either they did not know about it, or they assumed it was too obvious a hiding place. As the sun began to set, Iron gathered the group. They had another 20 miles to cover before reaching Georgetown. They would travel through the night again, pushing through exhaustion and fear and pain. They had no other choice. The second night of travel was harder than the first. The initial surge of adrenaline had faded, replaced by bone-deep weariness. The children cried despite their parents' attempts to quiet them. An elderly man named Abraham collapsed and had to be carried by the younger men in rotation. Every step was an act of will. Iron moved through the group, encouraging, supporting, sometimes literally holding people up. She discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. The fire inside her seemed to fuel her body as well as her gift, pushing back exhaustion, keeping her moving when she should have collapsed. Around midnight they encountered their first serious obstacle. A river blocked their path, too deep to wade and too wide to swim easily. Iron had planned to cross at a shallow point several miles upstream, but with their changed route, they had approached from a different angle. She assessed the situation quickly. The group could not swim across, not with children and elderly people. They needed another way. Solomon suggested building a raft. There was driftwood along the riverbank, and he had brought rope from the forge. It would take time, but it was possible. They worked in near silence, lashing logs together with desperate efficiency. Iron used her gift to dry the wood, making it more buoyant. Within 2 hours, they had constructed a crude but functional raft, large enough to carry 5 or 6 people at a time. The crossing took another hour. Iron ferried groups across, using a long pole to push the raft through the dark water. The current was stronger than she expected, and twice the raft nearly spun out of control. But they made it, all 43 of them wet and shivering but alive. On the far bank, they collapsed again. They were perhaps 10 miles from Georgetown now. 10 miles from safety, from the network that could help them disappear into the north. 10 miles from freedom. Iron allowed them 30 minutes of rest. Then she got them moving again. The final miles were the hardest. Dawn was approaching, and with it, the increased risk of discovery. The group pushed forward with the last of their strength, parents carrying sleeping children, the young supporting the old. No one spoke. No one complained. They simply moved, step after step, toward the promise of freedom. They reached the outskirts of Georgetown just as the sun rose on December 19th. The Washington House was a modest structure on the edge of the black section of town. From the outside, it looked like any other home. But inside it was equipped with hidden spaces, secret passages, and supplies for people on the run. The Washingtons had been operating this station for nearly a decade, helping hundreds of escapees reach the north. Daniel Washington, a free black man of 52, opened his door to find 43 exhausted people standing in his yard. His face showed no surprise. He simply stepped aside and ushered them in. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The escapees were fed, clothed, and given places to rest. Wounds were treated. The children were given warm milk and put to bed. Daniel Washington's wife, Eleanor, moved through the group with quiet efficiency, providing comfort and care with practiced skill. Iron sat apart from the others, watching the sunrise through a window. She had done it. She had gotten her people out. 43 souls, free for the first time in their lives. The magnitude of the achievement was only beginning to sink in. Daniel Washington joined her by the window. He told her that he had received word about the events at the Whitmore plantation. The story was already spreading through the black communities of South Carolina. A girl who walked through fire, a plantation owner marked with the names of his sins, a mass escape that no one had been able to stop. Iron asked about pursuit. Daniel told her that search parties were combing the area between the plantation and the main roads, but they were looking in the wrong direction. The route Iron had taken, through swamps and wilderness, had not occurred to them. By the time they expanded their search, the escapees would be long gone. He told her about the next steps. The group would be split into smaller units and moved north along different routes. Some would go by boat, smuggled onto ships heading to Philadelphia or New York. Others would travel overland, passing through a series of safe houses until they reached free territory. The process would take weeks, but it was well established and relatively safe. Iron nodded, absorbing the information. Then she told Daniel something that surprised him. She told him that she was not going north. Not yet. Her mother was in Mississippi. Lily had been sold to a plantation somewhere in the Delta country, hundreds of miles away. Iron did not know exactly where, but she intended to find out. She intended to bring her mother home. Daniel Washington was silent for a long moment. Then he told Iron that what she was proposing was almost impossible. Mississippi was the heart of slave country, the most dangerous place in America for a runaway. The plantations there were brutal beyond description. Even if she found her mother, getting her out would be extraordinarily difficult. Iron told him she understood. She told him she was going anyway. Daniel looked at her with something that might have been admiration, or might have been pity. He told her that if she survived, if she ever needed help, the Washington house would always be open to her. He told her that she was the bravest person he had ever met. Iron thanked him. Then she went to say goodbye to her people. The farewells were emotional but brief. Iron moved through the group, embracing each person, accepting their thanks and their tears. She saved young Isaiah for last. The boy looked up at her with those serious eyes and asked if she would come back. Iron knelt down to his level. She told him that she would. She told him that one day when he was grown and free, she would find him again. She made him promise to remember her until then. Isaiah promised. He threw his arms around her neck and held on tight. When he finally let go, his mother Ruth pulled Iron into her own embrace. Ruth whispered in her ear that Iron had given her son something precious. She had given him hope. Iron left Georgetown that afternoon, heading south and west toward Mississippi. She carried nothing but the clothes on her back and the fire in her blood. She did not know what lay ahead. She only knew that she would not stop until she found her mother. Behind her, the legend was already beginning to spread. The story of Iron Dillard and the Whitmore plantation escape reached every corner of the South within weeks. The details grew and changed with each telling. Some said she was a demon from hell, sent to punish wicked slaveholders. Others said she was an angel of the Lord, delivering judgment on the sinners. Some said she could not be killed by any weapon. Others said she could make men burst into flames with a single look. The truth, as always, was both simpler and more extraordinary. Esther Dillard, called Iron, was a 12-year-old girl who had been born with a gift she did not understand and had used that gift to free her people. She was not a demon or an angel. She was something more important. She was human. A human being who had refused to accept the conditions of her existence and had changed them through courage, planning, and an unwavering commitment to justice. But her story was not over. It was only beginning. Iron spent the next 8 months tracking her mother. She moved through the South like a ghost, traveling by night, hiding by day, following a trail of information gathered from other slaves, from sympathetic free blacks, from the whispered network of resistance that existed throughout the region. She discovered that Lily had been sold to a plantation called Magnolia in Bolivar County, Mississippi. The plantation was owned by a man named James Hutchinson, who had a reputation for working his slaves to death and replacing them with fresh purchases every few years. The mortality rate at Magnolia was among the highest in the South. Iron reached Bolivar County in August of 1856. She spent 2 weeks observing the Magnolia plantation, learning its rhythms and routines. What she saw filled her with cold fury. The enslaved people there were treated worse than animals. They worked 18-hour days. They were fed starvation rations. They were beaten for the smallest infractions. Many of them bore the marks of recent whippings. Iron found her mother on the 3rd day of observation. Lily was working in a cotton field near the edge of the property. She had aged terribly in the 14 months since her sale. She was thin to the point of emaciation, her hair streaked with gray, her movements slow and pained. But she was alive. That night, Iron made her move. She did not burn the entire plantation. She had learned from her experience at Whitmore that destruction was not always the answer. Instead, she targeted specific buildings, specific individuals. The overseer's cabin burned. The hunting dogs, kept in a kennel near the main house, were released into the night. The punishment shed was reduced to ashes. In the confusion, Iron reached her mother. Lily did not recognize her at first. The woman she saw was taller, stronger, harder than the child she remembered. But when Iron spoke, when she said the words that only the two of them would know, Lily's eyes filled with tears. They fled into the night together, mother and daughter reunited after 14 months of separation. Behind them, the Magnolia plantation burned in selected patches, enough to create chaos, but not enough to consume everything. The journey north took 3 months. Iron and Lily moved slowly, carefully, stopping at underground railroad stations along the way. Lily was weak from her ordeal at Magnolia, and she needed time to recover her strength. Iron tended to her with fierce devotion, making up for the years they had been apart. They reached Canada in November of 1856. For the first time in their lives, they stood on free soil. They were beyond the reach of American slavery, beyond the Fugitive Slave Act, beyond the men who had claimed to own them. Lily lived for another 12 years. She died in 1868, 3 years after the end of the Civil War, having seen the institution that had defined her life finally destroyed. Her last words, according to witnesses, were a prayer of thanks that she had lived to see freedom. Iron stayed by her mother's side until the end. But even during those years, she never stopped working. She made regular trips back into slave territory, guiding other escapees to freedom. She became known along the Underground Railroad as one of the most reliable and fearless conductors. By the time the Civil War began in 1861, Iron Dillard had personally led more than 300 people to freedom. The exact number is unknown because she never kept records. But the testimonies of survivors, collected after the war, give us a rough estimate. 300 souls. 300 people who lived and loved and had children and grandchildren because a girl whose fire could not burn refused to accept the world as it was. The war years brought new opportunities and new dangers. Iron worked as a scout for the Union Army, using her knowledge of Southern geography to guide troops through unfamiliar terrain. She participated in several raids on Confederate positions, her immunity to fire proving invaluable in situations involving burning buildings or artillery. There are unconfirmed reports that she was present at several major battles, though her name does not appear in official records. This is not surprising. Black participants in the Civil War were often excluded from official documentation, their contributions erased from the historical record. What we know for certain is that Iron survived the war. She emerged from it in 1865, 32 years old, ready to begin a new chapter of her life. She settled in Philadelphia, in a community of former slaves and free blacks who had built lives in the North. She married a man named William Johnson, a carpenter who had escaped from Virginia before the war. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. Iron never spoke publicly about her gift. In the years after the war, she wanted nothing more than a quiet, normal life. The fire that had defined her youth still burned inside her, but she kept it contained, used it only rarely, for small domestic tasks. Lighting stoves, warming cold rooms, comforting frightened children with impossible displays of dancing flames. Her children knew the truth, of course. They had seen their mother do things that could not be explained. But they kept her secret, understanding instinctively that the world was not ready to accept what she was. Iron died in 1912 at the age of 69. She had lived to see the end of slavery, the brief promise of Reconstruction, and the terrible betrayal of Jim Crow. She had seen progress and setback, hope and despair. Through it all, she had never lost her fundamental faith in the possibility of change. Her obituary in the Philadelphia Tribune made no mention of fire or impossible escapes. It described her simply as a former slave who had dedicated her life to the uplift of her people. It noted her work with freedmen's aid societies after the war, her involvement in local churches, her reputation as a woman of unusual strength and courage. Only one line hinted at the larger truth. The obituary noted that those who knew her best often said she carried a flame inside her that never went out. The Whitmore plantation never recovered from the events of December 1855. Randolph Whitmore survived the night of fire, but he was never the same. The burns on his body became infected repeatedly. His mind deteriorated. Within 2 years, he was confined to an asylum, where he spent the remaining decades of his life muttering names that no one understood. The plantation was sold to cover his debts. The new owners found it impossible to maintain order among the remaining enslaved population. Stories of Iron Dillard spread from cabin to cabin, inspiring resistance and rebellion. By 1859, 4 years after the Great Escape, the plantation had been abandoned. The land eventually became part of a larger agricultural operation after the war. The original buildings were torn down. The slave cabins were demolished. Today, there is almost no physical evidence that the Whitmore plantation ever existed. But the story survived. It was passed down through generations of black families in South Carolina and beyond. It changed with each telling, as stories do, accumulating details and embellishments. But the core remained the same. A girl who fire could not burn. A night of judgment, a path to freedom. Cornelius, the black overseer who was Iron's biological father, met his end on the night of the escape. When the fires began, he understood immediately what was happening. He had been watching Iron for months, sensing that she was planning something. He could have tried to stop her. He could have raised the alarm, organized pursuit, done everything in his power to preserve the system that had given him privilege. Instead, he made a different choice. As the fires spread and the chaos mounted, Cornelius went to the overseer's cabin where Thomas Garrett was struggling to escape the flames. He did not help Garrett escape. He stood and watched as the man who had whipped so many of his people burned. Then Cornelius walked to the main house. He found Randolph Whitmore in the study, covered in burns, barely conscious. He looked at the man who had owned him for 40 years, the man whose favor he had courted and whose cruelty he had enforced. And he told him the truth. He told Whitmore that Iron was his daughter. He told him that the instrument of his destruction had come from his own plantation, raised under his own nose, and he had never seen it coming. He told Whitmore that this was justice, and that it had been a long time coming. Then Cornelius walked out of the house and into the burning night. His body was never found. Some believe he died in the fires. Others believe he escaped in the confusion, vanishing into the vast network of enslaved and free black people who moved through the South in those years. There are stories of a man matching his description appearing at various points along the Underground Railroad, helping escapees, trying to atone for the sins of his past. We will never know the truth. Cornelius's fate remains one of the many mysteries surrounding the events of that night. What we do know is that his choice, whatever its ultimate outcome, mattered. In the moment of crisis, when he could have done harm or good, he chose good. He chose to let his daughter's plan succeed. He chose to stand aside while justice was delivered. It does not erase what he did before. The years of cruelty, the betrayals, the compromises that kept him in power. But it suggests that redemption is possible, even for those who have done terrible things. It suggests that the capacity for change lives in every human heart. This is perhaps the most important lesson of Iron Dillard's story. She was not born a hero. She was born into circumstances that should have crushed her. She was tested and tormented and pushed to the breaking point again and again. But she refused to break. She refused to become what her circumstances tried to make her. She could have used her gift for destruction. She could have burned the South to the ground, taking revenge on everyone who had ever hurt her or anyone who looked like her. The power was there. The justification was there. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she chose liberation. She chose to use her power to free others, not just to punish enemies. She chose to build something rather than simply destroy. This choice defined her life. It defined the lives of the 300 people she led to freedom. It defined the generations that came after them, the children and grandchildren who exist today, because Iron Dillard decided that saving was more important than revenge. The fire inside her never went out, but she learned to control it, to direct it, to make it serve purposes greater than her own pain. In the end, that is what made her extraordinary. Not the gift itself, but what she chose to do with it. There is a plaque today in Colleton County, South Carolina, near the site where the Whitmore plantation once stood. It was erected in 2015, 160 years after the Great Escape. The plaque tells a simplified version of the story, mentioning Dillard by name, noting the number of people who escaped, acknowledging the significance of the event. But plaques cannot capture the full truth. They cannot convey the terror and the courage, the planning and the sacrifice, the impossible strength required to challenge a system that had endured for centuries. Only stories can do that. And so the story continues to be told. In churches and community centers, in family gatherings and school classrooms, in books and documentaries and conversations between generations. The story of Esther Dillard, the girl they called Iron, the girl that fire could not burn. She was born into chains. She died in freedom. And in between, she changed the world. Her final recorded words, spoken to her granddaughter on her deathbed, have been preserved in family records. They serve as a fitting summary of everything she believed and everything she lived for. She said that the fire never burned her because it recognized her as its own. She said that everyone carries a flame inside them, a power that can destroy or create, depending on how it is used. She said that the choice is always ours. Then she closed her eyes and let the fire inside her finally go out. But the light she left behind still burns today. In every person who refuses to accept injustice, in every act of courage against impossible odds, in every choice to save rather than destroy. That is her legacy. That is her gift to all of us. The girl that fire could not burn showed us what.
They say just forget. Move on like it's easy. But forgetting you feels like remembering someone I've never seen. I've been trying to erase you from the places in my mind, but the harder that I fight it, the more you're hard to leave behind. Every memory keeps slipping through the cracks I try to close, like a face I should remember, but somehow never know. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. Every moment turns to fragments, every thought just fades to blue, like I'm searching for a feeling that still only leads to you. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. But now every empty moment still reminds me what is real. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. Some days feel off, like I'm standing but still falling. A little pain, a little tired, and no one to tell it all to. There are days that feel unsteady, like I'm drifting out of place. Every step just feels so heavy, with a smile I have to fake. A little hurt I keep inside me, a little weight I always hide, and 1,000 quiet worries I've been holding deep inside. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. I keep walking through the silence like it's all I've ever known. Every crowded room reminds me how it feels to be alone. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. Maybe one day I'll be stronger, maybe I'll learn how to speak, but for now I keep it buried in the parts of me too weak. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you.